Morning, everyone. This is Chris Korapati from Cambian Lab. With me is my colleague, Hiren Shah. Today's session is around master data management for supply chain excellence. Just before we get into the topic, a few logistics about this webinar. The overall agenda includes a few minutes of providing an overview of some of the master data management needs and challenges, especially as it relates to product and supply chains. We will show you a demo of various scenarios, workflows, and master data assessments and needs. Following that should take about 40 or 45 minutes. The last 15 minutes or so, we'll leave open for Q&A. However, it is likely that you will have questions as the session is going on. So you are free to type in your questions in the Q&A tab of Zoom bar. So if you look at your Zoom bar at the bottom, you have various tabs, and one of the tabs is Q&A. Please, as and when you have a question, feel free to type in that area. Our team is looking into that area so that we are actually able to answer the questions in the last 15 minutes of this session. You also, if you have any other general inquiries, there is a chat button. You can also type in your queries in there. But as far as topical questions, just type them in Q&A. Okay, with that, a little bit about Cambian Lab. So we are a Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area based company with locations in Boston and Detroit. Our primary focus is on new product development, introduction, and supply chain. And we are a good mix of both technology and operational people that came from the industry, various industries like automotive, high tech, semiconductor equipment. And have a point of view as well as a lot of experience in these topics. Today, as I told you, I'm going to be one of the panelists. Along with me is Hiren Shah. We come from the industry, from the operational roles in industry, and have quite a bit of experience on both sides of the equation here, both providing software solutions as well as an operational team member, colleague in various industries. One of the things I think it is pretty obvious for the people that are attending, good master data is critical for supply chain excellence. And master data can come in many shapes and forms. Like I did say, for today's session, we're probably going to be looking at the two most critical ones, or maybe three: materials, to a certain extent, the type of material called SKUs, and suppliers. And of course, all of the other types are important as well. But these are central to a number of supply chain oriented workflows as well as excellence. And what we've observed is master data workflows tend to be pretty challenging for most organizations. I mean, you will get them done. That is not a question there. But how it is done is, I would say, is a lot to be desired. In most cases, we've seen just lots of emails, Excel files floating around. And what we thought was a shortcoming in current approaches is there's just too much focus on data entry or data management as opposed to really what is the goal of master data, right? To improve business. And then the other thing that we also observed is business stakeholders are tangentially involved in master data. Whereas it is done primarily with somewhat of a silo fashion, how it is collected, how it is evaluated, and how it gets into various systems. So it has some consequences, which I think people overcome with heroic efforts. But all of this in our perspective, can be avoided. Again, as I told you, a lot of data management perspective today, master data management perspective, and unfortunately also the solutions that are out there are very, very focused on data entry, whereas we see real master data management as a collaborative business process. And then if you really look at what happens today, there's just a lot of information that is exchanged in a very ad hoc fashion, and somehow it gets into the various systems that orchestrate your supply chain, your purchasing, and your e-commerce activities, and so on. So it's a challenge, and what we would like to see, and that's an effort with what we are trying to do, is how do you get master data to be a lot more business focused, where you are really trying to understand what is the logistics flow, if your supply chain risks, e-commerce readiness, and so on, as opposed to just thinking in terms of data. The second thing that we're going to also look at, and that's our effort, is to how do you get the correct stakeholders involved at the correct time so they are actually able to participate in these master data processes effectively. And obviously the goal for us is to really make it simple enough and fast enough that this is just taken off the table as an issue, right? And while it is being done, ensure that it's completely error-proofed, so bad data doesn't ever get into various systems that support your commerce and supply chain activities. So I think we found a solution. Basically, actually, even our customers are very highly appreciative of the way we approach master data management. And the solution that we're going to show today is zFlow. It is a workflow engine that is primarily designed for supply chain oriented processes. And one of the biggest areas that we found customers adopting zFlow is for master data processes, only because it has a lot of process and object models that can readily be used. And it comes integrated with many of the solutions, so it just makes it a lot easier to work with. And as you will see in our presentation today, a lot of what we do involves key business stakeholders. They get involved at the right time, providing the right information, doing right assessments. So appropriate master data is created and distributed, right? So one of the advantages, so when we are looking at master data management, we primarily focus on supply chain focused master data. That includes materials, parts, moms, approved vendors, just the basis. Most of our solutions support those types of workflows. The reason why we are actually able to effectively support master data management is because zFlow is used for fairly critical workflows in NPI supplier development. And one of the things that happens in all of these different workflows in the functional areas of NPI and supply development is you create master data, or you're making adjustments continuously to master data. So it naturally flows from those workflows into master data processes. So you don't have to, in many cases, treat master data as like a separate activity. There are various capabilities that we'll come to. And one of the things that today you will see is that master data comes in many, many shapes, especially. And workflows can take on different shapes and forms. There is no one thing of one way of doing it. I'm sure your company has approached master data workflows in many, many different ways. zFlow allows you to support all of those, design those, and support them. However, it also comes with a number of out-of-the-box workflows. So when we looked at the different types of things master data workflows are used and designed. There are so many that we have encountered, not only objects, but the way it is approached and done. Right? It can be done in product engineering. It can be done in component engineering. It is done as part of e-commerce. It is just done as core master data workflows. All of these, in one way or another, are dealing with master data, both product and supply chain oriented master data. So we're gonna skip through some of these things and really jump into the demonstration. So what we are going to do is spend the first few minutes on really the materials oriented workflows. Where do they originate, materials? What are the different types of workflows that are used to really evaluate and distribute information to various systems, especially around parts and materials. And then in the second section, we'll look a little bit about e-commerce. It's something that is somewhat a lot of our customers are trying to understand or getting into. They have obviously a separate, very established e-commerce channels, but there are more and more coming in. How do you really support these types of channels? And the last part, we'll look at supply chain oriented master data and the different assessments and workflows that you can use to support that. Okay. With that, so the first topic is around material master. Obviously, material master has many facets. You can see some of the key facets here at the top. And a lot of stakeholders really need to come together and make sure that it is properly set up and properly maintained, right? So this is one way of looking at the master data. I'm sure a number of you have SAP, or even, for example, Oracle. If you look at a material master in SAP, it has a somewhat of a different view of the world. Actually, it is quite close to what we are looking at here, but they've established the master data definition is spread or really divided into different functional area views, right? And you really need to address the master data needs from this functional perspective. So and then if you really look at master data for e-commerce, right, there are lots of other types of information that you need to really manage, get, and release to various e-commerce systems. So all of these are different renditions of master data. So we're going to look at what are some of the better ways to handle. We're going to use the solution directly here. So to the right is the browser. So I'm going to use this browser as the main going forward. This is zFlow, where a number of master data elements are set up and different workflows are designed so that appropriate stakeholders can participate. So there are workflows like extend material master, new product introduction, process for multiple materials, production transfer. As I told you, these can take different shapes and forms based upon how an organization handles master data and master data processes. And then you have a lot of engineering oriented information that comes together, logistics oriented for a part. So all of these are very valuable pieces of master data that you as a business stakeholder are providing it or evaluating it or making sure it gets to the correct system and location, right? So there are lots of different types of master data, from customers to supply chain risks and supplier risk assessments. For us, all of these are master data as it relates to your products and your supply chain. Okay, So let's start with, so the other thing that when we are looking at is a lot of these workflows involve the correct people at the right time. So we'll look at, start with a very, very simple, what happens from a new part is requested, right? You are trying to establish a new part in your system and how a workflow like that can look like. Now, you may wonder, where is this new part coming from, right? A lot of times, you have design systems where people release the design information from your design systems like, ECAD systems, Mentor Graphics, or team centers, etc., team center, Windchill. So that actually, when that part is released, it is still in a very, what we would call to be a design-oriented state, right? So you have the part, product, the moms, they might actually even include, some of the bill of materials, everything is set up. So you can start to see how everything is at the design state, right? So in some cases, depending upon how your organization is set up, you may even have additional information about the components, right? In this case, A10X is a part, and the component engineering teams have already actually selected Intel as the manufacturer, and Intel's part number is that we are going to use. Similarly, if you look at memory, the component engineering teams have actually selected Samsung as the Micron as the two potential suppliers, or actually one of them is already a supplier, one is qualified, right? And we even set up so that it can actually be purchased from Samsung and Avnet, right? Samsung is a direct manufacturer, whereas Avnet is a distributor, right? So all of these types of setup sometimes can come from design, but can also be done in a cross-functional team. Now, this is in a design state. At this point, there is nobody, especially when it comes to your plants and purchasing, it is still not like really visible for them so that they can actually do purchasing and use it in manufacturing. So that is where you have these types of workflows that start to come in. So a good example here is, now that we have those design parts, it can flow directly into this. So we are going to now say A10X 0519. So we need to set up so that people can start to purchase these materials and create, right? So now we are in this very, very simple, workflow step where, if you look at it, this workflow is designed so that, now that the new part is actually being set up, we need to make sure that the change control boards, the export compliance teams, they all are in concurrence with what we're doing. And then the basic material is set up in SAP. Okay, so what we'll do it is, either if you know this information, ECCN, the CE mark setup, you can do it, or you can let the correct people. So we have these roles set up here, engineering managers, export compliance. They can actually come in and participate in these workflows and do it the most appropriate thing. So here, for the sake of time, we're going to just say we need to make sure that it is available. The basic views are set up in SAP. Test. So now the workflow takes over. It actually involves the correct people at the correct time. So if it is a CCB approval, design engineer, product engineer are involved, and they have to approve this part being set up in different, in our core manufacturing, MRP, and purchasing system. So we'll go ahead and do that. For the sake of time being, this is actually now needs to be performed by the component and design engineers, right? I'm not a performer, so I just submitted it. However, in interest of time, as an admin, I can actually complete their activities. So let me just go ahead and do it. As an engineering manager, I'm going in and completing this. Typically, when people get it, they usually get a request, an activity, an email that they can. It looks like this, saying, "Hey, you need to do something here, so that you can finish this." So that's how they get directly into the system here. Okay, and so here, in our case, we're going to complete this new part requests. As a taking on the role of other people as an admin, right? For in the interest of time, we're going to do that. So that's how this workflow is set up, so that we follow the process steps and the material is created in SAP. Okay, so this is, we are now just requesting, just set up new material so that we can start to add. Now, what happens in reality is once that basic stub of a material is set up, you need to really make sure that the correct purchasing setup, there are various views that we talked about, right? There's different forecasting, purchasing, MRP views, storage, quality, etc. All of that needs to be added, depending upon, as a matter of fact, depending upon where you're going to either use that part, manufacture, if you're going to be like an assembly, so on, right? It is at that time, you can use this extend material process. So extend material is a fairly common workflow that is used so that you are making sure that a designed or purchasable material or material to be manufactured is now ready to be either manufactured or purchased in specific plants, right? So in this case, we're going to see what happens, right? We're going to pick a material that we want to extend. We just created A10X, right? So some basic setup is already done, right? We're going to do some basic weight information. Now, when you are extending a material, there's a lot of information that comes into play, from purchasing, MRP related, production, scheduling, sales and logistics, accounting, right? Storage, warehousing, quality management, all of that, if you're going to be doing it in particular place, right? Again, for sales oriented goods, you don't have to worry about MRP and so on, right? You just need to really provide, where you're going to deliver it from. But if you are going to be purchasing and manufacturing, you have to start thinking about a lot of different sets of information. And the correct people to do that would be the actual people, right? People that are in the plant, that are in finance, sales, purchasing. For us, those would be the right people to actually execute, provide the right information at the right time. So what we are going to do is we've actually set up a workflow so that appropriate people come in and provide that right information. And once it's all set up and reviewed, the information is extended or added to specific plants and sales and distribution centers and so on, right? So that's how it is done. So here we're going to release this for workflow. We're done with that. So if you notice now, it is with the MRP team. They can go ahead and set up the correct information. We've kind of told of some of the defaults taken off and added some certain defaults based upon the plant. So it becomes, they are providing the right information at the right time. So similarly, if you look at the workflow here, if we do let's assume we've finished the MRP information, you go to the purchasing, only the information that is needed from a purchasing perspective is now being asked for the team to set up, right? So the workflow here is set up so that you are actually able to involve the right people at the right time, and continue adding, enriching the information, and finally, similar to what we had seen before, once everything is come together, you extend information in SAP, or it could be Oracle or any place, so that the planned purchasing, MRP, everybody can actually use it appropriately. And one of the things we observed when you're doing that is, while that is a very, you're doing the correct information at the correct time, and the right people coming in and doing it, you do need to actually enhance that information with additional, I would say, very specific to one location, one plant, and how the logistics flow happens. Those are the times when you actually use something like what is called a plan for a part, right? So here, this is going to be a collaboration between both the local lean operations team and supply chain procurement team, and perhaps even suppliers, right? How do you establish a flow? And that's where we believe something like a plan for every part type of approach that supports your materials management workflows and processes make a lot of sense, right? In a plan for every part workflow, there are many elements to it. You can, depending upon it, how you do, how you set up, and how you establish flow within your plant as well as within the organization. You can design, the Kanban loops and the storage locations and the actual delivery frequencies, delivery methods, how much comes, what is the container type. There's a lot of additional work that you can, assessments that you can do, calculations, so that the flow is established at the local line level, right? From inventory, so that there is a very clear picture of how the material is procured. So here in this case, this is an A10X SoC that is being supplied by Intel from their, let's say, where is they're sending it from from their Taipei DC to our factory. It's probably local. They're doing it like 4 times a day, the order quantities, and they'll be doing this in this container, right? So this type of additional assessments and analysis and data sets would be extremely useful to complement your, what we'd call to be core workflows, right? Your core workflows are getting your parts that need to be manufactured and that need to be purchased into the correct information at the correct time, so that they are visible and available in all the systems and all the plants and DCs, etc., all the different systems. So we see this whole materials management, how people come together to provide that as a very critical piece of how things get done. And one of the advantages of doing this is if you think of how the old way, where people are exchanging information with emails and hoping that things get done, versus a very coordinated fashion of doing things, is you can actually start to see how fast things can get done, right? So if you look at new part requests, obviously you can see things can done very fast. This data is a little bit off because we are most of the time finishing everything in one shot. but you can keep track of, where the bottlenecks activities are, and, how to make sure, those bottleneck activities can be addressed, but based on the statistics as you do more and more of these. Okay. We're going to spend a few minutes in e-commerce, right? So when you think of SKUs and materials, a lot of these SKUs, all of these materials become SKUs, right? If you think of it, your goal is you're using lots of parts to manufacture something. At the end of the day, you need to be able to sell that too. And if there has been one disruptive development in the last 18 months or maybe 15 months, it is pretty much everything is going the way of e-commerce, right? There are lots of channels that you need to be able to be seen, be there, be seen, and be bought. One such example, of course, is Amazon, right? So we look at, what do you need if you're thinking of Amazon as an e-commerce channel? And then this applies to lots of other, your own website or your B2B store that people are using. So if you think of an e-commerce material, that looks pretty, in many cases, dramatically different, right? It is a same SKU object. But if you look at something like a Levi's jeans, right? Believe it or not, this is actually master data as far as e-commerce websites or Amazon vendor or seller central is concerned. They are thinking in terms of what is the header, what are different aspects of it, lots of images. You need to provide, description, detailed information that you need to collect. Not only that, so they're, depending upon the type of product and category, you might have to provide, for example, in this case, if the product type is software, you can provide lots of different types. So just from batteries, there are many, many types of batteries that you can do, right? So these are the types of things that you need to start worrying about as far as maintaining master data. So in this case, if you look at the master data that is available for this item, so this is all of that about the master data that you need to keep track of. All the description data that you have to use, different types of specifications that e-commerce channels request, lots of images that you need to provide, right? And then you also need to start to worry about, especially if you have variations. You need to provide the variation information and what is possible, what is not, right? So this is a whole set of new master data information that is now expected, especially if you're dealing with sales and e-commerce. And in addition, there are different types of automated ways to distribute information. In this case, this is a good example of, if you want to submit an SKU to Amazon, you have to use a different technique to send all of this information. If you have most companies that have fewer sets of SKUs can use Excel and get by. However, if you have a lot of images, a lot of SKUs, there's a more automated way Amazon and other e-commerce channels ask you to provide. So master data becomes very key. So here we are actually submitting the SKU that has been developed out of our material. Okay, so this SKU is what is being submitted to Amazon so that it can actually show up. So once you go through this workflow, the right people approve of it, they provide addition, enrich the information, it shows up in Amazon as an SKU, right? So there is just now suddenly the demands for e-commerce are such that there is a lot of workflow as well as work that needs to be done. We know of companies that have large teams that are dedicated to this work, right? Keeping up with the demands of e-commerce channels, making sure that the master data is right, pricing is right, the images are done correctly, because that has, believe it or not, a enormous impact on whether your product is even listed. Is it listed well? Does it show up in searches? Can people purchase easily? So on, right? So now this starts to hit home in terms of, if you don't have a very good and managed process for making sure that you are well represented in these e-commerce channels, it can actually affect your top line and the bottom line. So that's why we see master data becoming extremely important as you move forward. The next set of master data that we're going to look at is suppliers. So we've seen in our assembly that we've already selected some suppliers, right? So if you look at next, we are getting Intel as your primary manufacturer, also our supplier for this A10X. We need to, if in terms of, how do we bring on board, right? So one of the things that you do as a workflow is to use a workflow like new supplier request. Like, we want to bring Intel on board. Part of what you do there is to get supplier provide some information, basic information. Internally, you might do a little bit of risk analysis. Finance is interested. VP of supply chain is finally approving it, and the vendor is actually created in SAP, right? So you can actually similarly set up a workflow and have the correct people involved doing the correct things and actually onboard the supplier. However, there are lots of things we believe that you should do as part of this supplier assessment. One is, your end goal is to make sure that you have all the information from a supplier standpoint, right? Both the certifications, their actual plant level information, because a lot of your parts are coming from some of their plants, and you need to make sure that they are properly validated, verified, correct certification statuses, etc. That is there. In addition, you may actually also want to do certain risk assessments, right? So in the case of Intel, we've done a little bit of risk assessment, and there are a lot of techniques to do risk assessments. You can evaluate risk of a supplier, and generally, when you think of a supplier, especially that are providing parts to you, you need to think as a combination of supplier as well as a part. If it were just an MRO supplier, routine items, you can just do risk assessments just around the overall supplier organization. However, if you are actually getting purchased parts that are used in production and are somewhat critical to your manufacturing, your finished good strategy, it is a good idea to actually evaluate supplier risk from multiple angles. And they could be, depending upon what those evaluation assets are, could be like from disruption to, if it is a Portland, right? If it is the main factory that is going to be shipping products for you for this A10X system on chip, you need to really evaluate the risk, what types of risks does that plant face? Same thing for that part. You might be interested to know, some of the risk criteria from a quality perspective. Similarly, you can actually do intellectual property forecasts. There are lots of risk categories depending upon what you feel are important for this relationship. This supplier, Intel, providing A10X, for your Z Phone X, right? So that combinatorial equation is what you need to look at from a risk evaluation perspective. Now, once you've collected or at least internally agree on these types of risks, there are risk calculation techniques that can use to arrive at a numerical or qualitative values. Here, everything is numerical from a rating perspective. 1 is non-existent, to 4 is moderate risk, and 10 is failure is certain, right? So you can use these at least assessments to understand what are the risks that are facing from a supplier plus supplier part combination. Once that is done, you might want to even extend that risk assessment to the level of a supply chain. Right, so in this case, we've actually have a supply chain that looks like this. So we are making Z Phone X. We have like 3 sales regions. Let's focus just on US sales region because that brings us maybe like 10 billion in revenue. And this is our overall supply chain setup that supplies the sales region. There are 3 DCs. This DC is fed through Port Long Beach, also through as a backup LAX airport. Again, primarily it is coming, most of the shipments are coming from Foxconn and Shenzhen via the Hong Kong port. And importantly, there are 4 key suppliers that we've identified as some things that we need to monitor from a risk perspective, and a couple of supplier locations because that are feeding through this whole supply chain. Right. So your perspective is to understand, hey, where are places of failure for us, and if you look at it, you might, as a team, can come up with different risks at different nodes of your supply chain today, right? So if you look at Bakersfield, DC, there's a potential for labor dispute. The risk score is 4, rating is, weight is 1, rating is not set up yet, but there is a mitigation strategy. If something happens in Bakersfield, route everything to Memphis. Same thing, if you look at Foxconn, there are multiple risks here. Capacity shortage, there's no mitigation strategy yet. That means somebody actually has to now, we can highlight that and make sure that there is a plan in place to work around it in case. Well, there is a new type of risk showing up these days, which is, there's a ransomware, right? That can stop operations. Risk mitigation strategies, you may, as a company, may have to help these guys, address this cybersecurity issue. Maybe the delay can be just 1 day, as opposed to complete shutdown, right? Same thing, delays due to poor yield. One strategy is to add an extra shift because there are only 2 shifts right now. So these are the types of data, master data, that starts to make more business sense. We need to stop thinking in terms of, hey, we need to add some data to master data and get it done, and start to think intelligently about parts, and are we ready? How is our supply chain? And is there flow within our whole supply chain? So multiple angles to really look at. So with that, we'll stop and take any questions and answers. Yeah, so there's a question around, some of these workflows. For example, if we look at this workflow, it seems like purchasing, sales is one after another. It doesn't have to be like that. There is a workflow step. I'll show you. It's called it's a parallel step where everything you want to add can be done all in parallel. So everybody can come in and fill in their parts of the provide specific areas, functional area information, and that can be done parallelly. And actually, it is a very, very common scenario. Think of a sequential workflow that can take 7 days to parallel workflow that can do 2 days. So we actually encourage use parallel activities as much as possible. And they don't run into each other, although they can be working on the same data item. Okay. Another question is around integration to different systems. Do we have to set up a separate infrastructure so that Zflow can work with various systems? Actually, no. Zflow comes directly integrated to a number of systems like SAP, Salesforce, your supply chain planning systems, your engineering, design workflows. So information is flowing into Zflow as well as from Zflow to SAP and other systems seamlessly. And that's all done as part of workflow without you having to create a separate this thing. So it happens naturally. People do certain things, people enrich information, they're reviewing it, approving it, and a follow-on step could be just create a vendor in SAP, and the workflow automatically takes care of that. We provide connectivity to a lot of these systems, as well as pretty much all of the application, what are called programming interfaces, APIs, that are commonly used, from customers to pricing to materials, costs. All of those are accessible to us. And that has been a really big win for a lot of our customers because they don't need to worry about it, number one. Secondly, these workflow design, because of the embedded integration and available data models, can be done in just days or weeks, as opposed to months or never-ending projects that are common in these types of scenarios. There is another question on customer-oriented workflows. So we do have additional areas. We've already seen some of the e-commerce master data and related workflows. But what is also common is, especially new customer onboarding. We have seen, especially from sales operations, people that have CRM systems where the customer account, who is just a prospect, still needs to be brought into the finance, billing, and ERP systems as a customer. They tend to have a hard time onboarding new customers, especially onboarding new B2B customers, so that you can actually deliver. You can do the billing, you can do credit risk analysis, and so on, right? Before they become real customers. So we have a workflow around new customers that is pretty popular. It does a number of things, including involving the correct people, finance, sales, customer service teams, so that they can actually provide this correct information about the customers, as well as update the various systems. Like in this case, creates a new customer, sets them up properly in SAP, with a number of different, very intricate data sets that you need to provide for SAP, so that you can bill and you can correctly evaluate their their position, right? Their status in the hierarchies, etc. You also connect directly to the CRM systems and make sure that the prospect is now actual customer, right? And then there's services that can be provided. They are replicated in Service Cloud, etc. So this is a very popular workflow within zFlow, the new customer. Generally, we tend to see a lot of needs around materials, depending upon the type of customer market you are in. Either it's going to be a supplier or customers, new customers. There's another question of what kind of customization is needed in zFlow. So one of the great things that we have observed so far is most of, I'd say, practically all of zFlow master data workflows and master data objects are maintained by business teams or master data teams. There's very little need for IT to be involved, especially when you're designing workflows and how you want the workflow to perform, right? So in this case, there are three main areas, how you design the workflow in terms of how do you set up the blueprint for a workflow. And this can actually be done by, actual business stakeholders. We call them process owners. Very, very simple. Okay. In most cases, we can, with some reasonable confidence, tell you that you can be up and running with your own workflows for many of these between 1 month, 6 weeks. You're ready to go. Okay. So in terms of finishing off the rest of the things, what we do suggest here is there's a lot of things. Just to show you an idea, we have different types of customers have been able to use zFlow for many different things around master data and some related areas as well. We have to say, there are a lot of scenarios around NPI and supplier development that that complement master data workflows. Before we close, there's one last question, one more question on what types of issues, errors that users usually have with zFlow. The types of issues, as a workflow actor, so there are many people, for example, if I log out and log in, most of the users I would say 90% of the users are primarily workflow actors. They are completing these activities, right, as part of workflows. So when they select, pick the link and then come here, all they primarily do is, they are providing some information, enriching some information, doing some analysis, and completing the activity, right? So that the log is established and correct information. They're registering, as a reviewer or approver, or data enrichment activities. So by themselves, they don't see very many errors. We've really made it error proofing as one of the key capabilities of Zflow. So you can shut off fields. You can only allow them to select from drop downs, or only certain validated values can be selected. We can run validation checks. So end users, actors in a workflow, don't necessarily face any issues. As a process administrator, all processes have process administrators. There are some times when there are instances where certain users are not assigned, because the system in some cases does dynamically create and assigns users to particular activities. That's when you have to get involved and assign performers and so on. So that's another thing. There are times when if you are connecting to SAP, there could be errors because SAP system is down. We can make sure that it is retried, etc. So there is another question around: are you able to accuracy of data? Yes, you can design the rules in the system so that if one field is selected, the other one is automatically selected, or you can actually even run validations either at the level of an object or for all of the different objects. So there is always an option for you to run these validations. So we haven't set up any validation rules, but the validations do check for all the correctness of the master data elements, duplicates, etc. Maybe some really good scenarios of exactly the types of rules and how do you validate and how do you catch before bad data starts to show up in different systems, and it may never happen. So error proofing is like a big part of what master data, some of the techniques that we provide. Okay. So with that, what we do, one of the things that we encourage pretty much all of our customers, first try Zflow, and then make sure that it does what they are expecting it to do, and then decide, hey, if it's the right thing, let's try to adopt it. We definitely encourage you to try, and we actually even do POCs. A number of our customers actually did pretty elaborate POCs, all done within a week or two max, because of the speed with which things can be done here. So once you get the recording and the presentation, we have our contact information. If you would like to, please reach out to us, or we can reach out to you and and arrange a free POC or a test drive. Okay. So once the recording is available, we will send out the presentation as well as the recording broken down into different areas, sections, so it's easy to review. If you have any questions, our contact info will be there in the presentation. Feel free to send us an email and we will respond and answer. Again, thank you for the time. Have a great day.